Hello, this is David Lee from Human Nature at Work, and welcome to this webinar series, Get Better Results Through Better Conversations. 10 conversation wrecking mistakes to avoid and 10 best of tips for making your conversations generate better results and build better relationships. And when I say best of tips, I mean from all the work that I've done over the years and from the full day programs that I do on this, what I try to do is select out of that the most useful hit the ground running tip. So this is going to be part one of a three-part webinar series. I'd like you just to let this quote sink in. The performance of our organizations depends on the quality of our conversations. And isn't that true? And what really motivated me to put together this program, this system, and this webinar is when I looked at my experience over the years with leaders and managers wanting to have, quote, a more motivated workforce, wanting people to perform at higher levels. And then when I heard from employees about their experiences of their managers, it really boiled down to typically the weakest link between the results managers and leaders want and the results that they actually get. That weakest link is a conversation. And so the better you are at having the conversation, the better results you get. So what's the conversation you most need to have? For you to get the most out of this webinar series, it's helpful for you to be thinking about a conversation that is most important to you. And here are some of the more common ones that I've heard over the years. So there's the general here's some feedback conversation, and you know how fraught with difficulty that can be. The person instantly getting defensive. There's also the more specific performance type of feedback where there's a gap between what I need and what I'm getting, whether it's in a formal performance review or whether you're delegating something and what you're getting back is far different from what you had in mind. Then there's the I need you to raise your quality standards gap. And this can be very touchy, where somebody thinks that they're delivering A quality work and it's really like B or B minus. And how do you have that conversation in a way that inspires them to give A quality work rather than leaves them feeling resentful and misunderstood? There's the all-important how can I be more helpful to you conversation that wise leaders have, where they ask their direct reports what they as the leader can do differently, do more of, do less of, do differently to bring out the best in their direct reports. Maybe it's the how can we work better as a team conversation. Maybe that's the conversation that's on your mind that you need to have. And then there's the interdepartmental conversation. How can our departments work better? Maybe that's a conversation that if you had and it went well, it would make the biggest difference both in terms of your own productivity and you're providing value to your organization. And then there's the what can we do to make this a more inspiring place to work conversation that senior leadership in any organization needs to have for people. So in this brief presentation, we're going to outline the 4 moments of truth in any important conversation, any crucial conversation that you need to get right. Number two of the 10 conversation wrecking mistakes to avoid in the 3-part series. We'll cover all 10. 3 of the 10 best of tips, and then how to dive deeper into this material. Big picture, the 4 moments of truth to matter if you want to get better results through better conversations. These are the 4 moments of truth when I look at breaking down crucial conversations, constructive conversations into their component parts. And each of these critical moments of truth have their own process, their own system, their own step-by-step to follow, along with guiding principles that dramatically increase your ability to engage people in constructive conversations that generate far better results. So there's the before, you've already read it, I'm sure. There's the before the conversation moment of truth, how you begin it, so the beginning, during, so How do you manage the conversation to keep it on track, to keep a positive trajectory? What happens if they start to get defensive or upset? How do you get it back on track? What about if you start getting upset? How do you get yourself back on track? And then there's the after moment of truth. Rather than just hoping everything works out, what can you do after to make it work and have positive results happen because of that conversation? Now, over the years, both from using this material myself and also coaching other people, what I believe is those first moments of truth are the two most critical ones, that they literally will make or break your conversation. If you make the typical mistakes that people make, the conversation will not go well. If you do the things that work, it'll dramatically increase the results that you get from the conversation. So let's talk about the before moment of truth, and that's what we'll focus on in this part one. We'll focus just on before. So what you do before the conversation will make or break the conversation, as I mentioned before. So let's talk about two mistakes to avoid. Number one is winging it. Conversely, the more we, quote, do our homework, if you will, before having the conversation, the greater the odds the conversation will go well. I mean, it just makes common sense. Yet oftentimes, many, if not most people, don't really think through clearly a strategy to make the conversation work well. Instead, what we often do is spend our time working ourselves into self-righteous outrage or resentment rather than spending time thinking strategically. And so not only, you think about this, if you're spending your time working yourself into self-righteous outrage and feeling angry and resentful, not only are you actively engaged in an activity that's ruining your day, adding to your stress level, making yourself miserable, but also all the time that you spend doing that is time that you're not spending thinking strategically, time that you're not thinking about how you can have a conversation that will get you the results that you want. Incredible waste of time, and it only makes us miserable. So I just want to stop for a second and think about conversations that you've had recently, or ones that really stand out in your mind because they were difficult, or maybe think about people that you find difficult, and think about how much time you spend thinking about what a bad person they are and being angry versus thinking strategically what would be the best way to deal with this situation and what would be the best way to have the conversation. So let's talk about tips. So number one, do what you need to do to shift into a positive emotional state, because our emotions profoundly affect our perception and our cognitive abilities. It's really important to shift out of angry, resentful, frustrated, etc. into a more positive emotional state, because we're not going to be able to think clearly, we're not going to be able to see the situation in a clear-headed way if we're in a negative emotional state. So how do we do that? Number one is vent. Common sense, yet sometimes if we think it makes us look weak if we have to lean on somebody else, we don't do it. Really critical to vent. And obviously you don't want to make that a typical way of interacting with people, because people will want to avoid you. But if you're really upset and you need to discharge emotional feelings, here's what you don't want to do. And in my seminars, I oftentimes say that I need to get this off my chest is not a reason to have a conversation with that person. If you feel like you need to get it off your chest, do that with a trusted friend. Otherwise, if you go into the conversation in that negative emotional state, they will pick up on it and they will get triggered and get into a negative emotional state. One of the questions that I ask, and a wise friend of mine has helped me remember this question, even if I'm feeling, I'm justified in feeling angry and upset, is to ask the question, what's for the highest good? How, even though I want to tell this person off and I feel like I have a right to, what's for the highest good? What would be a way of dealing with this person and having a conversation that leaves a trail of goodwill, that increases the odds that this person will go forward and maybe treat somebody else that they have to have a conversation with, treat them with greater respect and a deeper desire to listen to them and collaborate versus get into conflict. So 2 simple practices for shifting into positive emotional state. In the full version of this, we go into a lot more, but these are 2 that work really well. Number 2, learn how to shift from furious to curious. And this little rhyming statement comes from hearing a man named Mel Silberman. He was doing a keynote at a conference I was speaking at, and he said this. He said, people who have high levels of emotional intelligence, when they deal with difficult people, they get curious instead of furious. And this was years and years ago, hearing him say that, and I remember it just hitting me and just loving that, because isn't that so much more productive if we can get curious instead of just riling ourselves up and working ourselves up into outrage and resentment and anger, etc. So how do we do that? One of the simple practices that has made a huge difference for me is going from mind reading to reminding myself I can't read someone else's mind, I can only guess at their intention. Now, mind reading is actually a term that, it's a common term, but I'm using this in a more scientific sense. It comes from the world of cognitive behavioral therapy, where mind reading is one of a number of thinking errors or cognitive errors that people engage in that create unnecessary stress and oftentimes lead to depression. They're a common thought process that people who are depressed have. And so mind reading is this. Mind reading is when we tell ourselves we know what the other person's intention is. We know why they're doing what they're doing. And typically the thing that we, air quotes, know that they're doing and why they're doing it is some type of negative intent, some kind of evil intention. And so what happens? We convince ourselves that our guess, which is all that it is, a guess, is the truth. I know why they're doing that. And then we act like it's the truth, and then we get ourselves stressed out over something that isn't even necessarily real. We just made it up in our head. Now, mind reading is different from thinking strategically. So part of thinking strategically is saying, I wonder what their intention might be. But it's always reminding yourself it's just a guess. Okay, so mind reading is convincing ourselves we know why somebody does it and it's some kind of is doing what they're doing. It's an evil intent, and then getting ourselves stressed out. The antidote is to remind ourselves, I can't read somebody else's mind. I can only guess at their intention. A shorter antidote is just to say, how would I know? How would I know what's going on in somebody else's mind? And then the other simple practice, but powerful practice, to shift from furious to curious is to go from saying things like, how dare they be that way, or what a loser, how we, blah, 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 say those things in our mind, to shift from that to, how can I bring this up in the most useful way possible? So that's a tangible way of shifting from furious to curious. So the how dare they and what a loser, what a jerk, that just fosters furious. But if we ask the question, how can I bring this up in the most useful way possible, that fosters curious. And I speak from personal experience. When I ask that question, I can literally feel my emotional state shift, and actually shift into a feeling of eager anticipation, because that's what curiosity does. So actually that should be number 3. Number 3 is get an alternative perspective. Tips for the before moment of truth. So pick someone you respect, preferably someone more sensitive and wiser. So somebody who maybe is even more sensitive to you in terms of interpersonal relationships, emotional dynamics, because they might be able to pick up on things that you're not picking up on. also somebody wiser, because you don't want somebody who's a real Neanderthal, saying, give him what's what, tell him off. You know, you can do that by yourself. I can do that by myself when I'm upset. We want somebody who's wiser and can elevate our game, if you will, help us bring our higher self to the conversation. And pick somebody who's willing to support you and challenge you. And when I say challenge you, I don't mean somebody who's going to say, that's dumb, or you're wrong, or you shouldn't feel that way. That's obviously not useful. Make sure you're not that guy. Make sure you don't do that to other people. I mean, challenge you who's willing to say, well, are you open to a different point of view? Or, I guess I kind of see it differently. Because they're not in the thick of things. They're not in the heat of the battle, if you will. They can give you a perspective that you really can have. And I tell you what, when I do my programs on this topic, I oftentimes say that this has been a lifesaver for me. That many times I've got two key go-to people that I will say, this is how I'm thinking about it. What's your take on it? And I'll also say, this is how I'm thinking of bringing it up. What do you think? And oftentimes what I'll get back is a recommendation to tone it down. And so even though I felt like I had modulated my approach, maybe because I was still had some emotional charge, it was still coming across as a little too intense, maybe a little too aggressive. So really helpful to have somebody who's willing to give you an alternative point of view. But sometimes we just need to vent. Haven't you had that situation where you just need the person to say, wow, that sounds really tough, and instead they're challenging you and trying to give you their 5-point plan to solve the problem, and that's not what you want. So if you do just need to vent, let them know that's what I need right now, and maybe later I can hear some suggestions. And one of the things that I'll do, especially if it's a really caring, considerate person who's really sensitive, I'll say, hey, don't be afraid to hurt my feelings. I want to signal to them I really am sincere, and I want in wanting an alternative perspective here. So for your most sensitive feedback givers, you might even want to say that. So those are 2 mistakes to avoid and 3 tips that will help make the before moment of truth effective. Now again, in the full program we do a lot more, but those are worth their weight in gold. Those specific ones have really made a difference, both for myself and helping other people. Next time we'll do number 2, the beginning moment of truth. In the meantime, if you go to brtbc.com, Better Results through betterconversations.com, you can see more information on the program. But I want to bring you back to your original conversation that you were thinking about, and maybe there was actually multiple conversations, and think about what difference would it make in your life and in the results you want if you got really good at having these conversations. Think about the frustration, the discomfort, the less than amazing results that you get and would like, and how that feels, and then think about, what about if you could see a future where you got those results, those stellar results, and a future where that person or people in general were open to your feedback and wanted to hear what you had to say. And think about what that would be like. And I ask you this because doing this is really hard work, speaking from personal experience. It's like learning any skill. You don't learn it overnight. It takes practice. It takes learning processes, learning word choices, learning a number of bodies of knowledge, if you will, and developing skills, which only takes practice. And you're not going to do that hard work unless you really believe that it's worth it and really connect up with the price that you pay for not being as good at these conversations as you want. So I really want you to think about that because obviously I want you to apply this information. And then if you liked this, hopefully you did, if you want to sign up for parts 2 and parts 3, you can just sign up below in the link below this video. So again, hope you found it useful and interesting, and hope to see you for part 2 and part 3. Thanks so much. And also at humannatureatwork.com, I've got a number of articles on how to have constructive conversations, how to have those crucial conversations and make them work. So thanks so much, and I'll see you in parts 2.